and it's maybe something to note for later. I think we should probably keep going.
Yeah, we'll keep going, but I might.
Hello, thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is John Glover. I'm the Director of Artistic Planning at Kaufman Music Center. Thanks again for joining us for this incredibly beautiful concert. The two people joining me on this conversation need no introduction. Adam Tendler, who just performed this beautiful concert for us, and then Christian Wolff. It is such an honor to have you here to talk about this world premiere that we've all just experienced. I'm getting a bunch of questions in the chat already, and I will keep monitoring those as we go. So if you have more, please send them in. But I thought maybe we could start. There's a lot of love for Christian for your music getting the last word tonight, by the way. There's a lot of people already sending a lot of love about that. And that Nico says, absolutely, it's only right that you gets the right word. So there's a lot of love going on. So Adam, could you just start with what prompted you to reach out to Christian, or how did this start? Did it start with you having an idea of commissioning a piece to go with Schumann's Carnaval, or where did this come from?
I have always, I've been a fan of the musical world that Christian Wolff has inhabited since his teenage years, since I was a teenager. And so I kind of approached him as a fan. And Christian, I don't know if you remember this, but I sort of just casually just probably reached out for a year or two before the idea of a commission. And I was just sort of like, hi. That was just really my general approach was I exist and I'm a fan. And I was a fan of the music and I was a fan of the writing. And I was also just fascinated by his life, which was so varied or is so varied and seems I don't Christian, I hope I'm trying to say this the right way, but free, it doesn't seem tied to a label of what should happen. And when Christian describes, you know, being sort of a student of new music, but then going to the army and then going into studying and teaching classics. And then when I visited him in Vermont recently, he showed me around his farm. And so it's just like all of these things for Christian Wolff exist at the same time. So anyway, I've always admired him and his life and his work. And so I approached him as a fan and very sheepishly asked about the idea of commissioning anything. And I really was willing to do basically anything. Um, and it just sort of gestated over time. Christian's, has other commissions. And so it's sort of just a thing that was a back burner thing. But Christian, the whole Carnival thing, that's actually Christian steered us there. And Christian, do you want to say anything about that? Because it came as a surprise, I think, to both of us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, as it happened, when I agreed to do your piece, I had also been reading a book about Schumann by Jim Landis. It's fictional, but it's full of historical detail, and it was a great book, and sort of got me. I've always loved Schumann, but this really got me going. So that was in the back of my mind, and then I thought, okay, I got to write this piece, and I wanted to make a piece of some dimensions, but I didn't want to make it a one movement thing. I don't know why, I just didn't feel like that. And then I also, so I needed some idea about how to do it. And then the notion of a set of pieces, that's where Schumann came in. I mean, I happened to read about the Carnaval and 22 pieces. I checked it out. It seemed to work.
The piece had potential. Carnival has some potential to it.
So I set out to make 22 pieces. And I actually, relatively few of them have direct relationships to Schumann. I mean, this was in the background, and it was a structural idea which I had never used before. Actually, I've made short pieces, I made longer pieces, but nothing. This is sort of in between. And yeah, I guess.
Christian, sorry, because I know we have other questions, but I still am a fan, so I'm still like jazzed to be on the line with Christian Wolff. One thing that really surprised me, we were walking up and down this dirt road in Vermont, and we both sort of admitted that Carnival isn't our favorite piece of Schumann. It's not really it's sort of before the depressed, like, that whole hard on his. I'm curious. One thing that really I was taken with when you started to say that this piece was coming together and it was character pieces, but you kept saying Carnival, and I thought that was really interesting, as opposed to like David Bunter Tanz
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah.
a
I think
fantasy Stück.
actually,
It was Carnival, and that's when I was like,
well,
I think I'm learning Carnival, and then
okay.
this.
If I'd liked it better, it might have been more difficult to use.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. But actually, I'm getting to like it now that I've heard you playing
No,
it.
me too. Now I
Great.
really like
Yeah,
it. But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I have a lot of John and I actually went to school together, and we have a lot of like conservatory references of that piece.
mm,
That piece existed for me as a conservatory piece that I never played it either, but I just remembered hearing it every week, and I would just
yeah, yeah.
hear
That's
those
too
movements
much.
just
Yeah,
echoing
yeah,
through this.
yeah,
So
yeah,
I had to sort of like drop a lot of baggage with that
yeah,
piece
yeah.
and just start over with it.
Christian, when you, just quickly before we get to some of these questions, something that you just said about that it was easier to use this piece because it wasn't maybe your favorite Schumann. And when you say use it, and you're talking about the structure of the piece, is it just about the 22 movements, or are there more sort of tools or structures or things that you're pulling from Schumann, or was it just that idea of the overall shape?
It's the overall shape, but it's also, I do actually use one of the pieces. That's the Sphinx one. And where I basically just transpose the pitches. It's exactly the same layout as the Schumann, but it gets a little weird because of the EBow and all the rest of the stuff. And then the very opening of the piece turns up sort of about, I'd forgotten which one, maybe somewhere around the middle, and just as the middle line of a three-part counterpoint, way slowed down. So you probably wouldn't recognize it, but there it is. But I do that fairly frequently, that I pick up something from classical music or folk music or wherever, and just kind of use that as my material and then move on from there.
Mm.
I'm going to bounce around with some of the questions, because there's actually, Chris Cerrone had a question on here partway through the concert saying that he was saying, maybe it's just because I'm hearing this in the context of Schumann, but I feel that FANTAIL owes itself to the whole historical journey of Romantic music into Second Viennese, into the New York School and beyond, with flourishes of Feldman and Cage. And he was wondering if that was on purpose, because it feels like it is. So yeah, I wonder if you want to respond to that a little bit, Christian.
Yeah, sure. It's not on purpose. I don't set out to do this. On the other hand, it's very likely to happen, partly because my own background initially musically was purely classical. I was just soaked in that stuff. Bach to Brahms. I knew it all. I listened to it all. I got taken to concerts, heard the whole bit. And then, of course, I met Cage, and that whole world changed. And actually, I got interested in composing, and I wasn't going to compose like the old guys. No point in doing that. So I just set off on a completely different thing. And then in my later years, I've sort of come back to this notion of going to that stuff for material. I feel still fairly close to that tradition, but on the other hand, I feel it's a long way to go. There's no point repeating that stuff. So this is sort of a kind of in between, just echoes in the background. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we have a question from Nico Muli that has a very sort of coffee talk vibe to it in its phrasing that I'll share. He says, some of the Wolff scores are super graphical and leave up a lot to the performer, and others are pretty traditional in their notation. Discuss.
Okay. Do you want to do that, or shall I?
Well, one thing I will say is that when this piece arrived, and it was a big piece, and I mentioned earlier today, and I might have even mentioned it to Christian in one of the run-throughs I did for him, is it was so big. I mean, it's a big piece, and I looked at it and I thought, I'm not sure how to do this, or where to start. But one of the first impressions I had as I leafed through it was how varied it looked from part to part. And I had this feeling that I was kind of getting a tour of the laboratory, and in a way. And again, that's just sort of my thing. But that sort of, I'm going to show you this, and now I'm going to show you this. And whether or not it's Christian trying something out one day and then trying something out another day, the impression when I received it was you showing me something. And it was almost like having a tour of your studio in a way. And so it was interesting to see those approaches, and even the pieces that were sort of are strictly notated, relatively speaking, even those were varied. I could tell in their approach. Some seemed really silency, some seemed really, cacophony. I don't know. But anyway, so that's what my impression was, that there was variety from the get-go.
Well,
what about for you, Christian? Yeah.
Yeah, that sort of was my intent, the variety. I certainly didn't intend to make a kind of catalog of how I work.
Okay.
I work in various ways, and I just, whatever seems right at the moment, I do that. And then I'll drop it, and then I go to the next thing, do that until I think it's done, and so on. That's it. And as it happens, it's true that if I've written a couple of pieces, or maybe just one, where everything is fully notated, though even then, there's a lot that's not notated. I mean, it's more like old music. There are very few dynamic indications. There's no proximate tempo, no phrasing. You just have notes, and then you have to do something with them the way you do with older music. So there is that. But then, having done that, I also try to do open up the situation by having, for instance, that I guess the first one that's really free is the one with the trills. Where there are no pitches indicated. It just says do the trills, and so that's a kind of texture, if you will, and the rest is up to you. So that's wide open, and so forth, back and forth. But it's true, on balance, there's probably more fully notated stuff in this collection than you might have expected. Yeah.
There's an interview with Christian where, Christian, you say that I'm going to paraphrase it, but like, you try to think with a piece, what is the worst possible outcome that could happen? And how can I prevent that from happening? And so I'm easily haunted as a human. And so in a part like the trill movement, which is so free, or even there's for viewers, the part with the whistling and some of the extra musical stuff and the humming, that was graphic too, even though there's directions. And that kind of haunted me when I was a little nervous for you to hear it the first time. Think, oh my gosh, this sounds maybe too tonal, or this sounds na. I mean, not about my performance, but do you feel like over the years that a skill has developed in how to manage a free situation, like how to present a free-ish or indeterminate score and be able to somehow manage the results or even manage your expectations?
Yeah, I mean, that's my hope, is when I do these indeterminate things, as you say, I try to think of all the things that I can't possibly think of all of them, but if some of the things that might happen, including the possible worst ones. And then if I can live with those, then we're okay. If not, if this is going to produce something I really don't want, then I don't use it. So but you get to know, when you work with so-called indeterminate, it's not that indeterminate. I mean, it's determined in a different way than fully notated, that's all. And you have a pretty good idea what kind of sound I'm going. I mean, the thing with the trills, I know exactly what that's going to sound like. I mean, you could decide to do one trill or another kind of trill, but in fact, the texture is always going to be the same. So, and then it's true. I also like the idea that you get to do something. I mean, you get to decide, well, maybe I'd like to do, trill here or trill down here or whatever, and do it
right
as you hear something. So we have a kind of we work together.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of what could possibly happen to your piece, I'm wondering, did you know that Adam was going to be interspersing your work with Carnaval when you were writing it, or when did that suddenly happen to your piece? Adam, I remember you talking to me about it this summer. You're like, I have this idea. I'm wondering if you would be game for this, which sounded so thrilling. But yeah, Christian, did you have any idea that this is what would happen to your piece?
Absolutely not. I'm sort of expecting Schumann to be totally forgotten and not be part of this thing at all, except in these sort of very indirect ways. And I have to admit that the first time Adam proposed this, I was a little dubious. I wasn't quite sure, is this going to work? But I thought, well, he's a smart guy. He's a good musician. He has an idea of what he's doing. So let's see what happens. And it turned out very well, I thought. It was a really neat idea. I mean, someday I would like to hear the piece straight, so to speak, see what that sounds like. But this is very interesting, this back and forth between the two kinds of music.
And I think that'll be interesting for me too. I mean, I've been able to sort of, there's not like a comfort zone in either thing, but I certainly feel more adept at being an ambassador of new music than I do the classical canon. That's just my life. And so being able to sort of swing back and forth between them in the same piece was really comforting for me
Mm,
in a way.
okay. Yeah.
But so when you say doing the whole piece, what's interesting is my first thought is, oh my gosh, I wonder what it'd be like to do Carnival all the way through, which is what everyone does, you know. That to me is like, oh my gosh, I wonder what that feels like, you know. Someone described Carnival the other day to me as you feel a gnashing of those movements as they go on, and almost like by the end the wheels are coming off. And he felt a certain relief between the two of them. He felt a different drama in the
Mhm.
conversation between
Yeah.
the two. It wasn't a good or bad thing. But same with your piece. I'd be really interested to see how, for lack of better words, how it behaves with one of those movements going right after the other. And
Yeah.
you know, it wasn't an arbitrary. I mean, they do go sequentially, but I did go through several versions of that back and forth of trying to see which movements really played well together.
Mhm.
But yeah, it was definitely something I hoped for the best as well.
Yeah.
But I also sorry, just keep talking. But I also thought for listeners it might be an interesting experience as well because some people might be coming to this stream solely because Christian Wolff is here and his music is here, and others may have might only know the Schumann and that's their only reason. And so to that also to kind of swing on that pendulum with me kind of I think could also help listeners for this event.
Right.
Yeah, we had a question from David Hallman, which I think you just addressed really beautifully, about the emotional tenor of Schumann's music and Wolff's, and why do you feel, is it their complementary or contrasting nature that makes them pair so well together? And I feel like you've touched on that in a way. I wonder, Adam, can you talk to me about the pedaling at the end of the Chopin? Like I feel like there are these subtle things that you're doing in both Christian's score in the way you're interpreting it and in Schumann that, yes, you're alternating movements and yes, you picked an order, but there seems like there's these other nuanced sort of performance things that you're doing that are sort of taking this remix up to the next level in terms of how you're playing it.
Yeah, to me, the Chopin movement is one of those places where I I think I liked the idea originally of this idea of looping that movement because I felt like it's very to me a very awkward movement to play, even though it's really beautiful to listen to. And so I originally just thought I would loop it a few times more than the conventional two. And then I started to have this kind of William Basinski-esque, like, what would a tape loop be like if this just starts to wear itself out? Um, and then honestly, just because I was practicing that darn left hand, I started to practice the left hand alone, and I thought, well, this is gorgeous too. And what if this started it? And in my mind, just like I didn't really consult recordings about Carnival, I wanted it to feel just as fresh as Fantail. I just kind of wanted to think, okay, well, what if Schumann's in lockdown and pandemic? Would he, again, this is sort of like, you know, people from the John Cage Trust, Laura Kuhn, executive director, one of her best pieces of advice to me, because she saw me in an interview and I kept saying, well, Cage wanted this, Cage wanted that. And she said, you know, we really try to avoid saying Cage wanted, you know, Cage wanted anything, like, because that's our projection. But I just kind of kept thinking, do I think Schumann would be totally against this if I could really argue for it, if I could go to bat for this idea? And for that, it was really just that sort of thing getting foggier. And one more thing about that movement is, like Christian, I was reading a tremendous amount about Schumann, and I was also thinking about the disintegration, frankly, of his life. And I felt like that was a movement where I could play with that musically. This idea of him, and he had a piano, for instance, in the asylum where he died. And apparently, by all accounts, the people who heard him try to play his own music, that it sounded like madness. It sounded completely mad. And we don't know what that sounded like. I wonder what it sounded like, but I wanted to have that effect of what might that have sounded like if he tried to recall his favorite movement of Carnaval. What could that have sounded like? Last thing about that, though, is that there's a remarkable amount of effects in Carnaval already that where Schumann's doing really weird stuff with pedaling, with like ghost chords where you're playing the thing, but you kind of release the pedal so that you only hear the chord later. Um, big dynamics, and then you play these little chorales that he's playing with the piano as like this experimental tool, which for his time was really remarkable. And so that kind of asking permission was some of those extra musical things that I felt like, well, if he's in the sandbox with Christian Wolff, let's let him really play with Christian Wolff.
Those layerings happen in Christian and your piece too. I think it's the 12th movement where Adam, where you're whistling and singing and playing and just even looking at. I wish I had it right here so I could share it. But there are like these layers in the score. These sort of like almost some things are closer and some things are farther. And there's all these little beautiful connections like that I just found fascinating in this concert. I have one more question from the audience, which is from Sarah Hayfley. She says, Nico Mully's question was a coffee talk one, and mine is a dinner party one. As both Adam and Christian surely know, Schumann's Davidsbund was a collection of musicians and thinkers, past, present, and imaginary, that he invented. Who would be in each of your Davidsbund if you made one? Who are your imaginary friends?
Wow. Oh my God, Christian, that's hard. Who are my imaginary friends? Christian, do you have any more? You've met everybody.
I don't think so. Well, Schumann was a romantic, a little crazy. No, I don't know. No. I mean, imaginary friends, maybe some of the old composers, not friends exactly, but I feel in some ways I know them or would like to know. I would have enjoyed knowing them, but it's not in my head, so to speak. I don't have, no.
That's really fascinating. Yeah, that's fascinating because, I think Schumann in Carnaval, he's presenting these idealized versions of people like Paganini, and these are people he might not have even, or Chopin, people he might not have even met yet. I think I might be making that up, but I just remember reading some of that. And then also like his girlfriend, and also his and Clara at the time was not quite the girlfriend, and in fact Clara would omit the Estrella movement when she would play it, because that's the person he was seeing at the time. Anyway, it's really like interesting though that he brought all these people, his imaginary, and so it's an interesting question, because I'm thinking of, like, for instance, as we're talking, I have Nico and Chris and Timo and Seth Parker Woods and and Conrad Tao and all my girls and all my musical friends who are just like chirping at me, and so they're in my suite. I also have like people like my mom's there, and also I have some like really dear friends who are chiming in, and so it is interesting that we have, I think, in the digital interface, this sort of swirling interface all the time of people we're talking with. But imaginary, it's interesting because like I think as classical musicians, we're constantly dealing with our imaginary friends. That's my entire closet worth of music. But so I wish, and I think we talk about these composers as if they live right down the street, like we talk about Schumann like he's here at the table with us. And I think as classical musicians, or who are in that world, we sort of are always inviting everyone to the table. This is one thing I was thinking, Christian, and I was watching you talk earlier about how Cage really just had no interest in classical music that you could remember, or that, I think your words were, if he didn't hear another note of it, it wouldn't bother him at all. One thing that interests me is that we have to use that word classical music. And if you look for Cage's music or your music, it just is in that category. And we have to call it that. And do you think about that? Do you think Cage thought about that? I mean, he lived long enough to be in the 80s and 90s when he had to know that that's what his music was being called, and that's where the platform it was. Do you think about that at all? Or
a little bit, yeah. With Cage, I don't know what you would have thought, but I think of him as totally classical. I mean, he couldn't be more classical if he tried, which maybe would shock him. He did think about me. He was once asked to compare Feldman and Earl Brown and myself and himself. And what he said about me was that I was so musical. And that wasn't a compliment. It was simply a descriptive term. And by that, he meant, I think, I had this connection to the classical music tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you feel like, sorry, John, you're probably trying to wrap this up, but
We still have questions coming in, but we probably should wrap up in a little bit. Yeah.
Okay, two things. I want to see if this is going to break everything, but can you, I don't know
You
if
did
viewers,
it.
okay, so viewers can see this is an example of Christian Wolff's graphics score. And there are instructions that I'm cutting off, but this is the whistling and some of that stuff. And I highlighted it because each line has its own different dots, and so I layered it that way. But just so people could see the difference between like what might be written, notes on the page and the graphics score. But yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, that was great. A question from Elizabeth Hoffman. She wondered if Christian's music influenced you, Adam, in bringing out fantastical microrhythmic layers in the Schumann, in particular movements. And she's wondering if Schumann is typically considered a dance composer. It seemed like a very embodied performance.
I wonder. I definitely felt like, but I honestly think that in approaching Bach and Schumann and whenever I'm approaching like the classical canon, um, sort of like what Christian was saying about composing a certain way, I also don't feel like an obligation to play it a certain way. And so the freedom that I was sort of that Christian trusts his performers with and that he trusted me with in that piece, I felt like with the Schumann, I could be trusted to make what I think are decisions that have integrity, but that might not be what everyone else has done. But I feel like after 200 years, it's okay to do that. But it is interesting, like the dance element of Carnaval, because I do feel like Carnaval is this, that's sort of can be the numbing quality of it, is that you just get like waltz after waltz after waltz, and even the keys are some of the times the same, and it's sort of like, what is going on here? And which is why that kind of extroverted, I called it campy, and some people kind of got mad at me, that kind of camp quality of Carnaval kind of gnawed at me when I didn't really know it well enough. But the idea of him embodying a music that is both extroverted but also about masks, like we're not really seeing these people, but we're seeing masks all the time. And he said about David Bunzler-Tanz, which I can't pronounce tonight because of the mulled wine situation, is is that he said with that piece the masks come off, and I think that mask coming off Schumann is who appealed to me. But to actually play a piece which is about masks, I think is really fascinating, and about the dance world. And I don't know, Christian, you also composed a tremendous amount of music for dance, and you worked with Cunningham Company, So do you feel any connection when you're writing music to dance or to rhythms? I feel like there's a lot of speaking quality to some of your music.
Yeah. I'm not sure quite how to connect, but
I mean, yeah, I don't know either, but I do feel like with it's been said of your music that there's sort of like a spoken quality to some of the musical lines. And do you feel like that when you're composing it?
yeah, definitely. It's conversational. It's more like prose in a way than poetry. Some of the time, anyway. Yeah.
Well, this was beautiful, you guys, and it's a testament to your incredible music, Christian and Adam, to you putting this program together and your performance, that we just had so much conversation going on tonight. We should wrap it up just because we are broadcasting from the building, and so we should probably tie it up. So is there any last thought that you'd like to share, Christian? It's an honor to have you here. So
well, thank you so much. It's been great for me, and I've got to know a Schumann piece really well, which I hadn't expected. I've enjoyed everything. I enjoyed making the piece for Adam, and then I enjoyed this confrontation, or whatever you want to call it, this dialogue with the older music. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Well, with that, then I'll say thank you, everyone, for joining us. We still have a few more events before the new year comes on. So tomorrow night is the next in our installments of Performances Process with our artist in residence, Conrad Tao. Those stream for free on our Facebook page. So that's tomorrow at 7 p.m. one of Adam's Davidsbunds as friends at the dinner party. And then we've also got on the 21st, Conrad, as part of his residency, is joining our Face the Music kids. So you go over to the Kaufman Music Center webpage. That's at 7 p.m. on the 21st, kaufmanmusiccenter.org. And then our final program before we close for the year is on December 22nd, featuring the young violinist Ruben Rengel at 2 p.m. Eastern. So you can find all of these on our website, kaufmanmusiccenter.org. Christian, thank you so much. Adam, thank you so much for sharing this program with us and bringing it to Kaufman. It's been a highlight of the year.
Thank you. And honestly, I mean, thank you for the opportunity. Without you saying yes and without the team really putting this together and their trust and actually making such a beautiful product, really, this beautiful like piece for us to enjoy, it wouldn't be without your team. So thank you so much.
The Point of Order people did a beautiful job with the filmmaking as well. So yeah, thank you. It's easy to say yes when it's something like this. So, all right, well, have a good night, everybody, and thank you.
Thank you. Good night.